Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Bishop Talk. We are thankful that you have found us and that you are joining us for this next episode. Bishop Talk aims to connect people and engage in conversations that are hopefully meaningful and engaging to you on a variety of topics. And we invite you to visit sunshinecathedral.org, click on the Bishop's page, and you can find the whole list of Bishop Talk series that are going on there today. Today, we are honored to have with me our co-host, Bishop Durrell Watkins, who is the senior minister of the Sunshine Cathedral, and also we're both auxiliary bishops with the Global Justice Institute. And I am still trying to maintain my starstruckness. Oh, I get like he doesn't know I've been containing myself this whole time
Oh,
talking.
that's containing yourself?
Yeah, I've been contained
Right.
for a little bit here. I mean, I haven't popped out yet, but the one and only Reverend Jay Bakker. We are so glad you have found time to be with us today on Bishop Talk, and so thankful that we have you for just a few minutes today to talk about. We're going to look at faith, politics, and pastoral leadership, but we're not limiting our discussion to that today. But if it's okay if I call you Jay, Jay, can you just
Yes, please, please.
tell us about yourself, self-introduce yourself, tell our folks and viewers what you want them to know about you as we begin our time together today.
Well, my name is Jay Bakker, and I am a very haphazardly human being. Um, I'm a father of two kids. I'm twice divorced. Um, I'm a pastor. I stayed a pastor. Thank goodness I've never been part of a denomination, so didn't get kicked out. I've been pastoring Revolution for 30 years, 31 years. Well, I've been part of Revolution for 31 years. I've been pastoring for probably like 29 of those, 28 of those. Um, I love grace, the message of grace. That's my house hat says grace. The anarchy symbol is because I believe grace is anarchy because I believe it covers everybody, not just who we want it to cover. I've been doing Revolution. We started in Arizona. I've done it in Atlanta, Georgia for quite a while. I did it in Brooklyn, New York for 7 years, Minneapolis, Minnesota for 5 years. I've been here in Seattle for about 5 years, but after COVID, we stopped meeting in person. And so we've been completely online. And there's something called the Seattle Freeze.
Mm.
And it's what basically means like it's really hard to meet people here. So if you don't have people around, you really know it's really hard to start a church. So I've just been doing online Revolution since I got here. And it's been really great because I've got to really know folks all over the world
Mm.
through this. And that's been my main focus. Of course, my mom is Tammy Faye Bakker. My dad is Jim Bakker. That's always something people find interesting. You know, I don't even know how to introduce myself anymore. I love music. I love people, and I do believe I'm a reformer, and that I'm called to help bring reform to the church, and follow in the footsteps of Reverend King and John Hume and folks like that. Not that I would ever be at their status it's not what I'm saying. Like I'm going to be one of them. But what I'm saying is that John Hume was a peacemaker in Northern Ireland and helped bring peace to Northern with the conflict that happened in the Civil War in Northern Ireland called the Troubles, and much influenced by Dr. King's work. And so those are two folks that have had a huge impact on my life, as well as my mother, as well as punk rock music, as well as hip hop music and things like that. So I carry a lot of folks I really look up to, and some folks I look up to who I don't agree with, even like completely, but I like the way that they speak truth and or their truth in a way. So that's what I do. I'm gonna spend a lot of time on Instagram. People can follow me on there. I spend a lot of time on Facebook because I've built a lot of community on both of those areas. And I pastor Revolution Church. I do a service once a week here live on YouTube at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I've written 3 books. See, I'm really horrible at introducing myself because I'm trying to think of like all the things I do.
You're doing good. You're doing
And
good.
I work 3 other jobs that have nothing to do with this because I have to pay my bills, and it's been really tough financially. So I do house painting, I do lawn work, and I do after school program work with my kids' school. And that has been that has added a lot to my social justice work. And what I mean by that is when you see it, not just online, but you see it in real life, it talk about the Great Commission. It's just, when you see kids going through this stuff. And I'm an advocate for LGBTQ folks, have been since probably birth, but really became out as a strong ally in 2005. And so that's kind of covers some of the bases. Other things come up, we'll figure it out. But
awesome. Well, thank you so much again. Thank you for being with us today. And I know Durrell is chomping at the bits to get into this, but I just want to tell us something about you. How old are your kids? And just
thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Minnie Faye is 7, and she will be 8 this week.
Oh, wow.
And she's so excited about her birthday. And she is, she's an angel. And I know everybody says that about their kids, but 7's been a really cool age for her. She's really come alive. And my son Milo is going to turn 10 in August, and he is amazing too. I mean, I mean, literally, I get calls from the teachers always telling me like, "Oh, your kids are helping out and doing this stuff." Like I get very few like they're being bad. And I'm just grateful for that. They've got a real nice balance between me and their mother. I have them 50%. She hasn't, but we live right down the street from each other.
Oh, that's great.
And that's why I'm in Seattle for my kids.
Got it.
See, I don't, God could tell me to go somewhere else, but I'm like, if my kids aren't there, God, you're going to have to freaking write something else out, buddy. I'm sorry. I learned a long time ago that kids are coming first. What do I love when I love my God? Well, I love my neighbor, but when I have kids, I love my kids first. Then I love my neighbor. Okay. Sorry, everybody, but that's just how it goes.
I love it so much.
Yeah. Because half of my earlier career was just talking to hurt people whose parents put them after God. So I'm like, I don't think that works. Mm-hmm. They're great. I mean, they're really, really great. And, I'm just really proud of them. I'm grateful to be their dad, and they're just neat kids. They ask really tough questions. They ask theology questions that would be like just almost impossible for any of us to ask, and we able to have talk about that. My kids were with me. I was living in Minnesota when George Floyd was killed, and I was living in like ground zero. Wow. And I was able to really, my kids were very young, but I had a children's book from the King Center. I bought at the King Center before they were born. And I was able to sit down and go through them with that and stuff. And I think that kind of stuff really influenced them. And I'll give you an example here. And if I cry, I apologize. I am my mother's son. But I was trying to remember the Toys R Us theme song. Remember? More toys, more. Yeah. And I was like, for girls and boys. And then Minnie went, well, is it and they and thems? Because in her mind, toys are inclusive. And she didn't even miss a beat. I mean, like all of us with the whole like pronoun thing, we know the political size of it. We knew when it first started. Like I remember when it first started, I was like, are you guys stealing from the transgender community? Like I couldn't figure out what was going on. You know what I mean? And for kids, there's just this natural love for each other. Wow. And it's usually the parents and the teachers that screw things up with them. But I was just, so it's just kind of neat to see that happening. And I'm going to say the public school plays a part in that as well. There some great folks and great teachers in the public school, that I really appreciate. So they have friends of different religions and things like that. So anyway, I could go on, but this is not a show about my children, but I love my children. They're amazing.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, wonderful.
If I wasn't doing this on my phone, I'd be pulling my phone out and showing you pictures.
Well, I was waiting for a pop-up, to be honest. Like, here's my
I'll send you some pictures. They're adorable.
No doubt.
Well, I let me just pop off. I mean, you were talking about kids, we're talking about schools. I'm going to run into some political stuff right off the bat. What is your position or your stance or your opinion on putting the 10 Commandments on school property and saying this is what we need to follow, this is what we need to be focusing on? It's the 10 Commandments in these places.
It's funny because I saw that the guy in Texas, the guy who was like, I love the 10 Commandments, but, and I was thinking to myself, like, I don't really love the 10 Commandments, and I'm a preacher. But I do love what Paul said. Oh, I think it's ridiculous.
Right.
I mean, unless you're going to have every other religion's core thing in there.
Right.
And it's not a Christian. I mean, that's Judaism, and that's fine.
Right.
But for me, it's like, you don't, obviously, if that's a Christian saying those should be in there, I don't even think you understand what Christianity really is at that point.
No. Well, they say it's all about just universal morals, but the first four are religiously specific. Your Sabbath and your God, and no, that's not universal morals.
And Christians don't agree on the Sabbath even. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's like, seriously,
nobody
folks,
keeps
like,
that
which
one.
Sabbath do you want?
Yeah,
exactly.
I think it's just it's virtue signaling for folks who are not well educated in their own faith. And for, I feel like in the evangelical church, there's a lot of things evangelicals do right. I mean, they'll if you want to start a ministry to crocheting, you want to have a crocheting ministry, man, they'll just freaking give you a room. They're really good at bringing everybody in as long as you kind of believe the right thing. But this is an example of, it's just I just think you've got to keep religion out of it. I mean, because Christianity there's so many different forms and parts of Christianity. And the same people who want to bring in the 10 Commandments are the same people who argue with me that kids should not have free lunches at school.
Yeah.
And to me, that's complete hypocrisy. I think kids should have free breakfast, free lunch, and a packed dinner at school to take home if they need it. And some of my friends think I should go into politics, but I feel called to be a minister, not a politician. But I'll speak truth to politicians all day. Yeah, so I'm for me, my main concern is livable wages, affordable healthcare, free healthcare, to be honest with you, and equality with all human beings, And so I want to see work that pays a livable wage, rent that's affordable, and healthcare. Those are the main things I'm concerned about, because how are we else going to have discussions about anything else?
Right.
And I think the 10 Commandments are putting prayer back into school. If you tell me you don't believe that kids should have free lunch, then I just think you're a hypocrite, and you might not know it. But I'm glad to talk to you about why that. We have a thing at Revolution about argue well or disagree well. So often if we don't disagree, we just go straight to war. That's why arguing and disagreements are important. What's happening in the Middle East is horrific, and there should be peace talks. And even those peace talks take 30 years. There should be, in those talks, we should not be letting children die. And I think children should always be the kind of the tell sign of really where our faith is how we're willing to let children be neglected or treated or even indoctrinized. I really kept my kids away from a lot of my own stuff in the early days, just because I wanted them to be able to be open to what their hearts were telling them. So.
It sounds like you're just part of some crazy cult that believes in the kingdom of God.
Yeah, well, and I believe it's here, I believe the kingdom of God is peace, patience, or joy. I always leave joy out. You can tell I suffer from depression because, I have that Freudian slip of always leaving joy out of the fruits of the Spirit. But I believe that fruits of the Spirit. When Paul's talking about the fruits of the Spirit in Galatians, he talks about the things of the opposite. And we always talk about fornication and drunkenness and stuff like that. But we don't talk about, he also says factions, thinking everyone is right except your own group. All these biting and devouring one another, gossip. We forget that he says those are the things too, the things that we actually apply to us. He also says magic and stuff, which I don't think we're dealing with, or, are part of the bad parts. But yeah, the fruits of the Spirit to me are really how we bring it here. And I think we could have a great example of the kingdom if we were able to all live. We're in the richest nation in the country. We should all be able to live. We should all be able to live, period. I'm very concerned about the country right now. Like last night, tonight I slept. Last night I slept, but the night before I couldn't sleep all night. I just couldn't. When I think about, what's happening to the immigrants. And and the sad thing is it happened under Obama really bad as well. But now we're seeing it more, and something happens when it becomes visualized. That's the civil rights movement as well, as when that picture of that young man pushing that dog away and holding that cop's arm hit the American media. Civil rights did more for civil rights than Bull Connor. That's what I mean. As Bull Connor was such a jackass, he made people pay attention too. But what I'm saying is but it was Bull Connor's order to do that. You know what I mean? So I'm saying that picture, that photograph that went all around the world and was on the cover, it really brings you. And I also believe speaking truth to both sides. I'm not like, oh, I'm just going to go after the Republicans. I had a lot of my Democrat friends leave during the election because I had such a conviction over what was happening in Gaza and to the children there that a lot of my friends thought I was hurting the Democrats' chance. So they left the church, and I was like, okay, I mean, I guess this is the road we're on, but I'm trying to help people become kingdom minded and not make a, I remember Public Enemy. And by the time I get to Arizona, they had this song. It says, in the song, they said, neither party is mine, not the jackass or the elephant, And I often think we turn those into golden idols, which God are you going to choose? Those are your top gods. And then you can choose which Jesus you want after you choose those gods. Yeah. And it's got to be the other way around.
Well, I want you to talk a little bit more about this because, of course, cruelty is as old as humanity.
Yeah.
But right now, we seem to be in a cycle of super celebrating cruelty. Even people who call themselves religious, people of prayer, people of study. Like, what? But cruelty.
Yeah,
cruelty
but for me, I grew up in that. You got to remember, like when my parents had their scandal, cruelty was mainline denominations and evangelical denominations. Both sides were making fun of my parents. Some of the most social justice minded people in the world, when I work with them, tell me about the jokes they used to say about my parents. My dad was in prison my dad was in prison for 5 years and people didn't come to visit him. Nobody came to, barely anybody. But, and the sad thing was, at the end, it was evangelicals who kind of came in. And I would have, wished to God that we would have had more of my mainline brothers and sisters getting involved and help that restoration. But often we don't realize that we can restore. Like we're pastors, we could go in and say, all right, well, let's say someone like Mark Driscoll fell or something, was in prison, we should probably be the ones going there and showing the grace and showing the compassion and living up to the words we said, especially if we were the ones saying like, oh, you're so mean. Well, now it's time to prove that we're so loving. We gotta be known by, faith without works is dead. And remember, the end of that is if you pass a hungry person and go, stay full, they're naked, like, stay warm,
Yeah.
It's real easy to,
it's useless, Yeah. Because I remember when, basically Falwell just sort of swept in and took over the, all these kind of things. And so, he was an easy villain. He was an easy villain, right?
Because he was pretty much just twirling his mustache.
Yeah, because he was a cartoon villain. He was just wasn't even a good person, and a racist past, and just terrible. But somehow, and I know we're talking about you, and you're your own person, but you also are a legacy person. Like you come from, a pretty powerful ministry before even before you were around. But I remember. It's sort of famous, your mother speaking with Steve Peters and just being so kind and generous and loving. But that wasn't a one-off. Everything I ever saw her, when she was experienced, I forget if it was the first or second time with her own illness. And she was doing a documentary about her life. And she was visiting an AIDS hospice.
Yeah.
And it was so, I cried. Because she met with every person like she was their mother. She didn't preach them about anything. She didn't shame them about anything. In fact, she prayed. She prayed healing prayers. She's doing her own chemo, and she's praying healing prayers for these people that she just met that day. You can't see that and not cry. So that's a thing too. But that's not what we see much of. She is an exception, or she seemed to be. Maybe she's the rule, and we're only seeing the exception all the time. But if that's what Christian is, I desperately want to be one.
But when we lost everything, and when everything, when the big scandal hit, and we were in California for a while, my parents, I remember, found the poorest folks in the neighborhood that they could find, and we went. My dad took me to the toy store and was like, "All right, we're gonna get everybody. We're not getting toys for you." I was like, "What?" And he's like, "We're getting toys for these kids who are needy, and we're going to bring them food, and we're going to do all this. And there were no TV cameras or things like that. So that gave me a time to notice not just my mom, but also my dad both really believed what they preached. Like when they didn't have the budget and they didn't have the assistance and they couldn't just say like, well, let's hire a bunch of people to feed the poor. You know, they're like, well, we can't hire anybody. So now we got to, we got to do it. We can't set up programs all over the world. We got to do it now. And like, when my parents went back to like doing a church and a roller skating rink, after all that happened.
They still did it though.
And my dad picking up the homeless guy on the way, he would walk to church going, oh, he needs a ride. I'm like, oh, Dad, he peed his pants. And Dad's like, that doesn't matter. He needs a ride to church. We got to take him to church.
Wow.
And so for me,
you don't hear those stories. That's amazing.
You don't hear those stories. You don't see that stuff. So when people say like, well, why don't you cut your dad off because he's a Trumper? Why don't you do this because of that? And I'm like, I saw my dad's humanity when he went through that and when he was in prison. I'm saddened that he went the direction he went into, but he's still my dad. And, I know there's a part of his heart that I saw that, who else is going to talk to him about Paul Tillich? Who else is going to talk to him about Martin Luther King? Who else is going to share those, Hegel, talk about Hegel to him? You know what I mean? Like, who's going to talk about, like, and he doesn't know who he knows Dr. King is obviously.
Right.
But,
they weren't talking about that at North Central Bible College, though, were they? Those weren't the people they were talking about. But I do want to ask you about that also. So these values that are formative and transformative, do you think that came from their Pentecostal experience? Do you think that came from their family? Or do you think that come from their upper Midwest culture? Like, where do you think all that came from?
I think for my mom, it came being the oldest of like 11 kids.
Mm.
She had some were half brothers and sisters, but I think that helped too. And then I think it helped that her mom was divorced back then, and they wouldn't let her mom play the organ in the church for a long time.
Wow.
And I think that gave her that kind of empathy. Like she even talked, you got to read her book, Run to the Roar. It's really, not Run to the Roar. That's a great book, but no, I Gotta Be Me. I Gotta Be Me. That's my favorite. And she talks about like when her parents went to one time to see a movie and she thought they were going to hell because they were going to a movie. But you kind of see the things like these kind of, she just really felt that transparency was, I think when you grow up in somewhere that talks about literalism and like, oh, we've got to be literal, then you think, well, then of course I have to be literal in my life. I have to be honest in my life and I have to be transparent. For me, the reason I think the pastoral epistles are forgeries aren't because I grew up liberal and stuff, is because I grew up being told that the Bible didn't have contradictions. And so I studied the Bible and realized, okay, well, if it doesn't have contradictions, shouldn't we take these books out here? And should we remove this verse? It's not, was added later. And shouldn't we talk about this? So that's how that came, when maybe in an ally, now if I wouldn't care what the Bible said, but when I was becoming an ally early on in the years, I was studying the word and taking the words apart and doing all that stuff. And when, and it was, for me, it was like, well, it's not here. It's not here. So I think for my parents, you just got two people who were too honest for their own good.
Mm.
You got two people who are like really bought into it. And when you really buy into it, at a certain point, you have to start questioning it.
True believers are dangerous.
Yeah, they really are.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we don't realize is why arguing with some of these folks is important, is because some of these people who have this faith that we mock, if we were able to help set them free from misinformation and incorrect theology. And that's why I think this guy, Dan McClellan, he's a
I love him.
Biblical scholar.
Love him.
It's so important, And my thing is like, just don't be too mean. I want to always call him and be like, listen, because the people need you. They need you really bad. And introducing people to proper scholarship and things like that, that's where the rubber hits the road. You have to realize, like, okay, well, is this an idol? Is this something I've created in my own life? Or am I really going to follow this and find the truth? And I think a lot of those true believers, ultimately have to make a decision. Like, do I, tradition or truth,
Yeah.
And I think that's where my parents come from that, I think And just seeing like when they went to Pat Robertson and they started the 700, my dad was the one who actually came up with the name for the 700 Club, ironically. And they started did a children's show because they were puppeteers. They started off as puppet, like kids ministry. And like Pat Robertson was like, okay, well, you're going to have a white show and a show for the black kids. And my parents like, well, no, we're not going to do it unless all these kids are together. The kids have to be together. We're not going to do that. And he gave in and let them do it. You know what I mean? But that people don't know that stuff. They don't hear those stories. But that was the thing about my parents. People were people, always. Mm-hmm. And that's how sometimes when I admit, me and my dad don't talk that much, but we've talked a little bit more in the past few months, is me reminding him of those things. Mm-hmm. And I tell him, he goes, well, I don't know about your theology. I'm like, Dad, it's your fault. It's you and Mom's fault for the way you guys raised me. You told me to ask all these questions. You told me to be a real human being, to be transparent. And I have to remind him, like, you did the things that led to this.
And I believed you.
Yeah, like, you can't blame Brian McLaren and you can't blame Henry Nouwen. I mean, those guys played a part. Their books played a part in my life. But ultimately, you guys caused me to seek this stuff out, because I really believed that I had to hold this to the highest truth. And then I got into philosophy years later, and that really messed me up.
So your parents were obviously a big influence, but also you've had other influences. Like you, I just learned moments ago, actually, that you had sort of a mentoring experience with D.E. Paul.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah. Well, D.E., who was Donnie Earl back then, his parents' church, the Cathedral of the Holy Spirit, which had its share of scandals as well. When my dad was transferred from Minnesota prison to the last year, they put him in Jessup, Georgia, which is in the middle of nowhere. It was like, I think there was like a Subway and like a Shakey's Pizza or something. It was pretty bare, pretty like for Dad, it was better. But for us visiting, it was like, it was awful. Because before he was in like a really nice town in Minnesota. And now it was like, but he didn't have the fences and the barbed wire and all that stuff in Jessup. Of course, if he's tried to escape from the prison, you get eaten by an alligator. So, didn't have to have that many guards. Alligators worked. But the Polks brought me in when I was about 16, I give a guess. And I went to their school for a little while. And I lived with Don and Clarice, and their son is D.E. Polk. And me and D.E. were just like brothers. We played pranks on each other. We played pranks on everybody else. And he would always talk to me about grace. But honestly, I always thought grace was a way for him to get away with his own sin. I thought it was a compromise, And I left when my dad got out of prison. I went and started Revolution in 1994. And I guess at the end of 1995, I got really burnt out, thinking God hated me and all that stuff. And I moved back in with the Polks. I didn't move back in with my dad because me and my dad couldn't get along, unfortunately. And that's when I was really miserable. I got a job at the Gap, didn't want to work in ministry. And one day I looked and I would smoke cigarettes. I would just chain smoke out in the back of the house and feel so guilty. Like I just couldn't run from God. And I was a heavy drinker. And one day I just said, D.E., if this grace thing is true, I was just done. You got to prove it to me. And he said, okay, well, read Galatians. Read Galatians. Okay, read Ephesians. And he had me reading Paul's books. Now I'm very Paulinian, which also makes me really sad that a lot of mainliners and a lot of progressives avoid Paul. And I think that's why they become so mean. Is because Paul really gives us grace. Paul's closer to Jesus. Paul never mentions hell. If you can separate Paul from what they call reactionary Paul, which is not Paul at all, you get a better guy. If you read Romans 1, you also have to read Romans 2. And we can undo those scriptures also and say they're not about LGBTQ folks. But what I'm saying is it's also a setup. He's the way he writes in that book. But D.E. showed me that stuff. And I would remember calling my dad late at night being like, why didn't we ever talk about grace? And I remember my dad saying, well, it just seems too good to be true. And he's right. I mean, but it's not too good to be true. It's just too good. I mean, it's good news. That's why we call it good news. And so when DE pointed that out to me, it's wild because I feel like a lot of us, when we first hear about grace, we kind of carry the legalism from the old stuff with us. But for me, you start pointing out legalism towards evangelicals, and that's what I started to do. I was like, "Where were you? Why didn't you restore us?" Because remember Paul in Galatians says, "If you think you're too good to restore anybody, you're fooling yourself. You're really a nobody." And so when DE showed me that stuff, DE took me to. I remember when DE he was youth pastor, and we went on a trip with this group called Safe House, which was a homeless ministry in Atlanta, and I ended up doing Revolution under that church for many years, and it was DE or introducing me to them and stuff like that. So it was DE really showed me about grace, and once I found out about grace, it's honestly all I've been talking about since, because I think it covers everything, and I think grace covers forgiveness, and it covers reconciliation, and it recovers love and hope. It covers a lot of those things. They're all kind of like cousins, right? Or brothers and sisters. And so for me, that's the key. And I read people like Henry Nouwen and Brennan Manning, and later the years started reading some of Martin Luther King's work and realizing that was there, and then that kind of connected me to Tillich, and it just kind of. And then a friend of mine who's a philosopher introduced me to philosophy, and then I realized oh, that's who King was talking about. No, that's where Tillich got that. So it was just this really beautiful thing that kind of came out of that. So I actually was part of the memorial service. We did my mother's memorial at the Cathedral of the Holy Spirit before it was done, and then I was also part of Carlton Pearson's memorial service. I spoke at his memorial service at DE's church, because Carlton Pearson was also an influence in my life, and I'd known Carlton my whole life. I knew when Carlton believed in hell and fire and brimstone, and I remember me and DE talking about Carlton one time, saying you think he's real? You think he'd really be believing this stuff without the Mercedes and without the 5,000 people? And he did, because one day me and Carlton ended up speaking at the same thing, and both of our careers had hit a low, because I came out affirming, so all my evangelical supporters and work just disappeared. We're in Las Vegas, New Mexico, not the real Las Vegas. Me and him in the middle of nowhere, speaking at this small church, riding in a car. I'm like, oh God. I'm like, look at us, man. I'm like, you lost more people than I did, Carlton. And I remember asking Carlton about hell. And that's where I lost my belief in hell, because I said, well, Carlton, what about Hitler? And he goes, what you're saying. He goes, okay, right. Let's look at what Hitler did. Now look at what you think God's going to do. Which one's worse? He said, at least people die in the ovens. Woke me up, man. And then I did a simple word study after that and was like, oh, of course, And then I realized that Dante's Inferno and all that stuff down the road. But it was. And then I talked to Carlton right before he died. I called him and I said, listen, Bishop, I said, I'm just calling to love on you. And he goes, and he starts encouraging me. And it was amazing. He was laid up in bed and he's like, no, Jay, we got to talk, buddy. And this has really helped me a lot, because I probably am, in talking to you guys right now, still a pastor because of this conversation. Because I am tired. I am so tired. This is really tough work. He said, you can't stop, because you don't need to go get a building, because you don't need to go congregation, because that's not the future. But he's like, you got to stay online, and you got to keep preaching inclusion. You got to keep preaching grace. You got to keep doing this work. And he's like, just don't stop doing that. He goes, you guys are the future. And he had zero reason to have to say that to me, because I was just trying to be like, hey, my mom died. I know you're going through this. Let me love on you a little bit. And he goes, no, I got to love on you, and you need to listen to me. You can't stop. And so grateful for that,
That's what the prophet does, though, right?
Yeah.
That's what the prophet does.
Yeah.
Why do you think, like your mother just loving on these people with AIDS, You just huge advocate and ally and friend to the LGBTQ plus community. Carlton also really, I mean, he preached at one of our conferences, but also just setting people free from fear of health. Why do you think that pisses off the faithful? Like you're really selling grace and love and goodness, and like you're the gospel, and that just annoys people to no end.
It really does.
Why do you think that is?
Fear. Certainty. I mean, I don't know if both of you ever remember having a time in your life where you felt certainty, and maybe it was a little more cut and dry, and there's a little bit more people that you didn't have to like and people you could like. And there's a little bit of security in that certainty because you don't have a lot of doubt, and what is it? Tillich said that doubt is not the opposite of faith. It's an element of faith. And these folks don't realize that. They don't. And, I'll give you an example. That quote is really powerful, but I was reading an autobiography about Dr. King, and that quote kept him going for like 2 years in his work because he realized, my doubt, because I'm trying to think of the other the other philosopher, Nietzsche, really shook him, really gave MLK a real shaking of his faith. And then when he saw what Tillich said, he's like, oh, this is part of your faith. Your faith being shaking the foundations. Your faith being in doubt is not an opposite. It's not a different part. It's part of your faith. And I think people really fear that. And when you think about their preachers and their teachers telling them that they're going to burn for eternity, that they're evil, that gay people are evil, that people like me are evil and trying to drag them to hell, and they're not reading the Bible for themselves. They don't have any concept of scholarship. They don't have any understanding of even like historical background and traditions. And you know what I mean? It's like they're not educated. And I think it's easier to blame other people. It's easier to scapegoat.
Mm-hmm.
They're the problem. And if we just got rid of them, we'd be better off. And I think these people think about graces that were tickling ears. I mean, I remember how many evangelical folks reached. My mom was dying, just got cancer again. Her cancer had come back when I came out as affirming. And more people were worried about that than they were about my mother being sick. And so that really spoke really loud to me. But also they were like, oh, you're trying to tickle ears. And I'm like, I just laid off my staff. I had a staff of 7 people. We had health insurance. I had a ministry that had 7 people with health insurance. I mean, I can't ever believe that even happened. And I still thought I needed a bigger church. Now I look back and I can't ever believe I was at that level. I had to sit and lay each one of them off because I became an ally and affirming. I spoke out and did all this stuff. I lost every speaking engagement I had. And then when I did get involved in progressive churches, I would go and they would tell me I called God a man, and then they would yell at me for that. And I didn't, because I was just shifting over. And I was like, well, Jesus, everybody hates me. I can't win. We got to learn to be nicer to each other, even on both sides, folks. And, but, that kind of, but the point was that I wasn't tickling ears. I'm getting accused of like trying to be a people pleaser, and I don't have anything left. You know what I mean? I'm having to sell my house and sell my cars and let people go. And just as Carlton did when he followed his conviction. And, these folks I don't think they realize the cost of loving others and caring for others. And it's really tough, but that's also why we got to disagree well, like yelling at each other. I get very honest on Facebook, especially with people, but it's always with the hope that they'll come around. But I mean, the other day, I had a woman, she was talking to me about how wonderful Trump was and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, what about feeding, kids in schools and free lunches? And she's like, oh, that's the church, did the church, it's the church's job. And so I started going into I said, okay, she's going to have to hear Bible verses. So I said, well, what about like the Good Samaritan, was that guy going to get paid back from the Good Samaritans? Did he expect to get paid back from that guy? Or what about the part where it says, loan to people and don't expect being paid back? I'm like, where Jesus said this, or what about what Jesus said? And so all of a sudden she goes, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. Wrote it out. It's really funny because she said hummus heart, and I don't know what she meant. I'm sure, or not a hummus heart. It was another kind of Middle Eastern food that she said, a couscous heart, which I think was just a mistake. She meant to say something else. And but she rebuked the devil out of me and the demons out of me, and I just like, we're done. I can't. We're gonna have to pause this conversation for a very long time.
I see you right now.
Because when you start quoting the Bible, it shakes them, and there's a great fear that comes over them, and they, So I think it's mostly fear and insecurity, realizing that maybe your whole life is built around a community that's based on untruths. And hating other people or scapegoating other people. And then unfortunately, when you see a lot of the people who are doing things like deconstruction and stuff, often those folks are saying horrible things about them as well. So why would they want to convert when they see all these progressives talking about how dumb they are? And a lot of these progressives are ex-evangelicals. And I'm like you guys left because those folks were mean to you. And now you're being mean to them. Do you think they're going to want to just come over and rethink their faith? So I think it has a lot to do with scapegoating on both sides and a lot of fear and a lot of anger. And I think as long as the church continues to live in this scapegoating each other and these folks are in such fear and we don't love our enemies, we're going to continue to create this cycle. But I think as progressives or leftists or whatever you want to call us, we have to learn to be compassionate to those folks and realize like they're victims of misinformation. They're not the enemies. And I think that's why nonviolence is so important, is because nonviolence doesn't look to defeat enemies. It looks to win them over for friendship. It looks over to convert them. And I know we probably don't like the word conversion, but would be a pretty good conversion, my friends, is just misinformation. We have to remember that bad theology, misinformation, American Christian traditionalism is the problem. And we've got to learn to speak truth and love. And that's a tough one. I mean, the whole book of Galatians is literally about bringing legalistic Christians and free wishy-washy Christians together and just saying live in the community and make allowances for each other and love each other. And if you don't love each other, you're going to bite and devour one another. I mean, the story's been there since the beginning. Galatians is older tthan all the Gospels. You know what I mean? It's like, folks, this has been the problem since the beginning. There's answers in there. Let's look at it. So every year I do Galatians at the beginning of the year. This year I think we did 10 parts of it. The year before I went through the scholarship of Galatians, we did a 16-part talk on the freaking book of Galatians. What is it, 5 or 6 chapters?
Yeah, it's not even very big.
God help me if I ever decide to do Romans that way.
Right.
Jay,
3 chapters.
That'll be a year-long study.
You can do it.
I grew up in the Baptist church. I'm from Alabama. And one of the things I was, when I mentioned starstruck earlier, I probably knew about, because we was talking about age differences earlier between us. And so I was probably, kind of clued into a lot of the things that were happening in that area of ministry around our age time.
We graduated high school in 85 and 86.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's how old we are. So
when the best music was being made.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah.
And so, as I grew older and I became more tuned around, you and your family, the thing that has always kind of struck me about you, and I'm going to use this term, and you can can disagree with me if you wish, but I have always considered you to be the thorn in the flesh,
the thorn
in the flesh, and that you always told your truth. And I think that's what a lot of people really had I'm going to say, disturbance about you and your ministry, because you did not shy back from telling your truth. And what I saw in you telling your truth was based upon your mom and your dad's and your journey and your experiences. And so to take Paul's phrase and twist it a little bit, you were the thing that spoke to me a long time ago that I don't think that I knew you were speaking to me about ministry and what it meant to be steadfast, what it meant to show compassion to the other, giving your family experience of what they had gone through with Jerry Falwell and all of that gang into your dad's experience, your mom, you kind of was the one that I want to kind of say stood head and shoulders. Even given what you went through, you were kind of one that stood head and shoulders based on your faith. So I have always looked at you as being that's the guy.
And willing to pay the price and have paid the price.
At one point I was talking to somebody about this, and they said, I kind of put Jay Bakker in the category of Jimmy Carter. And
What?
I said, say more about that. And they said to me, well, here's the thing. We know the presidents of Jimmy Carter. We knew his humanity. We knew his passion to help people. And I said, and I kind of see Jay in that same category in that he has a passion to help people see themselves for who they are based upon his lived experience and what he's gone through. And I had to get my mind around it, like, okay, President Jimmy Carter and Reverend Jay Bakker. But it was really true.
Similar enough. I think, I see it.
I got it. It's like, that's about humanity. That's about compassion. And it really was focusing on the compassion that you both exhibited towards people and towards each other. And mainly towards, for Jimmy Carter, people who didn't like him and blah, 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 all that stuff. And here's your
love, grace, kindness, never faltered though.
Yeah. And then there's you.
Well, thank you for that.
That beacon that still shines today, that thorn in the flesh that's still shining brightly. And I think it shines brightly, and I'm going to say for both worlds to see. And what I mean by both worlds, many were, the LGBTQ community as an ally, your mom's faithfulness, your compassion that I think exudes your mom's faithfulness to becoming the ally that you are today.
Yeah.
And you still shine.
Thank you.
Shine head and shoulders. So,
Dr.
I feel like I'm gonna have to start wearing a hood in my hide. I'm getting tired, guys. I'll tell you, one of the hard things about being I've always been a little bit ahead of my time, and I'm not trying to brag. It's just, and honestly, that comes from growing up scared and not feeling like you fit in. I always felt like an outcast growing up. My dad was a workaholic. My mom worked a lot too. They were both. I was closer to my mom than my dad because my dad was always working. But just trying to feel like, because they were so like on the edge all the time. So you try to read into everything. So I think a lot of my knowing a few months or few years ahead of time of what is supposed to happen in the church comes from that, to be honest with you. I'm ADHD. I suffer from what the psychiatrist called double depression, which is really weird. I didn't even know that. I laughed when he told me because I thought he made it up. And then I looked it up and go, oh, okay. I do have double depression. That's weird. I also have learning disabilities. I was also a little chubby kid that, no matter my parents were on the top, I was still being made fun of by my classmates, And then when we lost everything, it was just like fighting my way through schools. I had to leave private school because the teachers were the teachers were more judgmental of me than the kids. You know what I mean? And this is when my dad was on trial and stuff like that. So it was a really tough go at it. And two, when you kind of an early adapter to things, like when I came out as an ally, I came out guns a-blazing, so I was like, I sat with my board and was like, listen, you guys can vote me out on Monday, but Sunday I got something to say, and luckily they didn't. Two of them left the board, but DE was on my board. So DE was like, if y'all join this board thinking that Jay Bakker wasn't going to say something radical and new, and DE, I don't think has a publicly affirming yet. And he was like, then you guys don't know who Jay Bakker is. You don't know who you came to work with. Jay Bakker is going to always be in front. And that was nice to hear, but it was also really scary because the main guy who got us our $70,000 a year grant said, well, the money's going to stop and we're out. And I said, well, I'm preaching on Sunday. You guys do whatever you want after Sunday, but I'm preaching on Sunday. And I did. I did my talk on Sunday. But
all prophetic preachers have had to face that, though, haven't they?
Yeah.
Like, if I say what I'm called to say, someone is going to punch me for it, but I still got to do it.
It's a big test. And then a lot of, I was going to this thing, Red Letter Christians. I helped start with a lot of folks. And it was really hard because I was talking to a lot of social justice pastors at that, and a lot of pastors who had been through the civil rights thing. And they didn't like the fact that I was saying, well, being LGBTQ, this is a civil rights issue. We got to talk about this. And a lot of folks didn't want to hear it. And it was really hard because all my heroes are like these civil rights guys. And I'm sitting around these civil rights guys being like, I don't know, Jay. And I'm like, are you guys kidding? Please tell me you're joking. You know what I mean? Like, I couldn't do it. And I was reaching out to, Brian McLaren. I was reaching out to Rob Bell. I was going like, you guys, I know privately you believe this stuff. We got to say it publicly. So we're not all just every time someone comes out supporting this community, we're not all destroyed. And it was really tough. And I find when you're an early adapter, people don't like to talk about it because it reminds them that they weren't there and that they had an issue with it. So I sometimes feel like you're like, oh, like it does feel like people don't remember, like they don't think about, it's really tough because you end up then, I got what, $300 in my bank account right now. You know what I'm saying? It's just one of those things where you're like, it's hard to follow your convictions.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Is it worth it? Yes. It's tough. And I honestly wouldn't even feel the pain as much if I didn't have kids or I had to provide a house and I had to provide food and lunches and clothes and, all this stuff you got to do. Because I'd be fine living in a box doing this work. But it's tough. It's tough. And I don't know. I mean, I've decided to really double down on Reformation for the church and that we got to do it, even though I probably have like 10 people at my live talk. I mean, I have a lot more who listen online all over the place, but it's been tough, guys. I mean, your word about comparing me to Jimmy Carter, that's really lovely. That's really lovely. And the thorn, though, is the thorn in the flesh is the true one. I feel it all the time because I've gone into progressive communities and had conversations and been told to leave because I wasn't being helpful, because I was seeing it through the eyes of, well, what about the pastor's kids we're talking about? One of my friends a few years ago was scapegoated by this really big group of progressives, that had like an online community, and they really tore his life apart and everything. But I had known him personally, and I knew his family personally. I knew the situation they were talking about. They were wrong, all this stuff. Finally came out, he got custody of his kids, all this stuff. It came out that he was wrong, but just a few months ago, he got canceled from a mainline church to speak at an event because there was all those old rumors were online. And I had to call the church and say, you're wrong. And I said, and I never do this kind of like apostoleship kind of thing, because I'm not that guy. I'm just kind of a wash and wear normal guy. Like, I love Jesus, but I'm just not guy. But I said, I'm calling with an authority of an apostle right now to tell you that if you continue to do this, your church is not going to last long. If you continue to give in to rumors and things that have been proven wrong, but you're just worried about the uncomfortable, because it was for the pastors. It was a pastor's thing. He was just talking to the pastor, but they didn't want their pastors to be uncomfortable. And so I really worry about the church. I'm really, and this is a progressive church that they love their LGBTQ people, but a white guy had some rumors spread about him online, and now he's the bad guy. Men are the number one rate of suicide is men between the ages of 40 and I believe 50 is the number one rate of suicide. I'm a suicide survivor. And that was not that long ago, folks. That was 2000 and maybe 17, 18. So
I didn't know. I didn't realize.
Yeah. So I mean, it gets lonely out here, and it's tough when you work hard. And there's so much rugged individualism in the church now. And now that we're all online, we're all hustling. We often forget about each other, and it's tough. It's really tough to do that. And I think we've got to learn to be more caring for each other, looking out for each other, checking in on each other, seeing how others are doing. And I don't mean to get dark. I don't mean to spank anybody, but here it is, me being the thorn again. I'm always learning from life how lonely it can be. I mean, I was applying just 2 years ago. I was applying for jobs to be just clean churches, just mainline churches around town. Nobody would hire me. I mean, like, I couldn't get a job. I thought, well, maybe they'll like what I do, and then they'll have me, help with the youth group or do something. I just gotta feed my kids. I gotta do this, and it's a weird. I just see. I'm like, oh well, this is why so many of us are the way we are. We can't even break into communities. And I have like learning disabilities and things like that I struggle with, and it creates a lot of insecurities. And So it's tough. I try not to be bitter, and that's why I look at Reformation, because I think we can do better. And I try to live a lot of grace. But I guess, too, I put a lot of hope in the main line because I grew up in an evangelical church. So I thought the main line would be the answer. And unfortunately, I've realized that everybody's got issues.
Yeah. The mainline church is so institutionalized, though. It's so organizational that that's a different set of obstacles, really. So it's a different bit of problem.
And I'm autodidact, so I'm all self-taught.
Yeah.
But I've also sat on the stage with Richard Dawkins and all these major atheists and spoke at these huge conferences where I've debated with these guys and had conversations with these guys and shut these guys down because they don't know basic biblical principles, or they don't know the concept. They don't know that, well, Jesus said more about hell than that. And I have to go, okay, well, actually, let me explain to you what these words mean. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wanted to apply it at a Lutheran church, and the guy was like, well, man, tell them that you're excited about them being gay affirming. I'm like, I spoke at their youth conference to like 60,000 of them right before they voted on the LGBTQ thing, because they wanted me to come there and kind of get a feel for the crowd.
Yeah.
And I spoke at Lutheran churches and all over America before that because they were trying to become affirming. So it's a weird world, man. It's tough. And I'm just being honest. I'm not trying to be bitter. I want to make that clear. I'm just trying to be honest. Sure. Like these are the things that we're facing. I had such a good time though at Carlton Pearson's memorial, because I was around a community that was really graceful and loving, and I even, because they're all bishops, so I had a T-shirt with a pocket on, and I put my cross in my pocket to fit in with the rest of them.
Extra cross.
Yeah. Now, like, look at Jay. I was like, hey, we're in Rome. Look, guys, let's do it.
I have one more question, because then Robert's going to say enough with your questions, Durrell. And then, because he's the timekeeper and he's the boss of all this, whatever. Okay. But I can
talk forever, so you'll have to definitely shut me down.
Well, that's his job. That's okay. I can talk with you forever also. So I have one more question, and I'm not going to say anything else other than maybe squeeze out a commitment that you will maybe this year or early in 2026 speak at Sunshine Cathedral.
Of course.
Okay, so other than that, I have one thing. You've got the Anarchy A as part of your grace, and I always think that the church at its best is subversive. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
My problem is I've never been subversive for subversive sake. And I've always taught like the folks who've come under me, and I've had guys who were wanting to be pastors who work with me. And sometimes I get up and preach, and I could realize they were saying controversial things just to make people nervous. And I said, no. I said, that isn't how you do it. I'm like, you really got to pick your battles wisely. If you want, be subversive for people, for things that really matter. For the longest time, I wouldn't even say a cuss word. All my other friends were like, oh, we're going to cuss now. It's cool. I'm cool Christian, But for a while, I was like, listen, I don't want to argue with that. I said F-U-C-K with somebody for like 6 months because they missed the whole point. I was talking about loving this type of person or forgiving this type of person. So I want to stay focused on it. It has nothing to do with me, the way I cuss like a sailor often. But it was me not wanting to say you've got to choose your battles wisely. And Jesus was subversive. The Apostle Paul was subversive. Good Lord, they were with each other. I mean, obviously, Paul called such a ruckus that they had somebody came in and wrote 3 other books and then added to Corinthians and all this stuff to try to make him seem like he tears down the whole hierarchy. And then someone comes in and is like, actually, men should do this and women should do this. It's like that's how subversive Paul was and Jesus was, and it seems to be this inclusion that the gospel seems to build on this onto inclusion. Like Jesus dies and then Paul goes, okay, I'm going to include him more. We also forget things like when Jesus was on the cross, not only did he have a moment of doubt, say, my father, but we also really often forget the one that he says, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. See, we often forget that we got to show grace sometimes when we realize people are doing what they don't know what they're doing if we really want to follow Jesus. There's also going to be moments where you're sitting in the shower crying, thinking God abandoned you. But at that moment, you're going to realize, my God, why have you forsaken me? That you're sitting with Christ, maybe not with God, but you're sitting with Christ. And so for me, being subversive is just the fact that everybody else is so straight-laced. Everybody just gets so locked into the way they're supposed to believe and the way they're supposed to think. I mean, I remember speaking at, it's a big school in New Jersey that you wouldn't think is in New Jersey.
Rutgers?
Is it
Rutgers,
New York?
Princeton?
Princeton. I was speaking at Princeton. And a group of the folks were like, well, don't you think we can still get something out of the pastoral epistles and we can use them in our tradition? And I was like, no, there's good stuff in there, but no, we can't. And, but they were really, they're Princeton. I'm like, guys, come on. You guys know this stuff. Why we got to reclaim this stuff? We got to make it clear what we're doing. And I'm not doing it to be subversive. I'm doing it to say, like, the church, so many good folks in the church, so many well-meaning folks in the church have taken some of the greatest messages of grace and thrown it out because they don't want to hear because they're afraid of the pastoral epistles. And that's where Paul's just a jackass. Paul's a jackass without the pastoral epistles, okay? He's got his moments. But he's also really affirming for a 2,000-year-old, again, being in the Middle East, doing all this stuff. I think a lot of us, if we walked out and people started throwing rocks at us and then we got in prison, we might be like, I might do something else with my life. So this idea of trying to challenge people is really just trying to get people to love more. So to me, it's not being subversive at all. For me, it's just following the path of what humanity calls. These people have breath. They are made in the image of God. They are worthy of love. And if I found out God was made up tomorrow, I would still say these people have breath. They are made in the image of God. These people, I see it. I see it in the little kids at school, at the after school program. I see the kids whose parents are too busy to pay attention to them, or the parents that might be struggling with drug addiction, or the parents that are workaholics. I see it in these kids' eyes, and I see what they have against them. And I can't imagine, like, if these poor kids were hungry, but I mean, sometimes I pack extra lunch for my kids because there's a station that they can put their extra food in for the other kids that have. This is not subversive. This is just caring about your fellow human being. And I think Jesus really knew what he was saying when he's saying, love your enemy as yourself, because he was saying, maybe you'll realize that your enemy is not your enemy. Maybe you'll realize you need to be more like them or less like them. But the fact is, even Paul says, when you restore, be careful not falling into the same trap. But what is he talking about? He's talking about legalism.
Yeah.
He's saying, restore these legalistic guys that I want to be castrated and I'm really angry about, but you still need to restore them. Just don't fall into the legalism, because legalism is so easy to fall into. So it's just, like I said at the beginning, of being haphazardly human. It's just this want for people to be human to one another, to recognize as each other's humanity. Identity politics sometimes do serve a great purpose, but for the most part, they keep us divided, and the powers that be have taken those identities and used them against us. So when I speak out, I understand when I speak out and say, well, I can't support Joe Biden, and I really can't vote for Harris because of the support of Israel. I get if an LGBTQ person gets upset with me about that, because they're going, well, the Democrats are the one that gave me my rights to marry and gave me the right. I get it. But I'm also saying, yes, but they're using those to get you there. But you've got to now, you might be the minority there, but you've got to care about these children. You got to care about these people who are dying. You got to care about these innocent civilians. Now it's your time to turn around and say no. And so we have to do that. It's not easy, but it's being human. And I don't ask things if I don't ask from other people. I mean, I remember showing up to schools and being, discriminated against because I had 2 Ks in Baker. People were like, oh, well, I heard what you did. Oh, your dad was in prison, got 45 years. I mean, that guy getting on the bus going like, woohoo, Jim Bakker, 45 years, I know what that felt like. And so for me, it's just saying we gotta do better. And we get this thing where people are often like, well, I can't recognize someone who doesn't recognize my right to exist. And I say, well, what if Martin Luther King would have said that? Or what about when Malcolm X had his change of heart when he was in Mecca and he came back? What if he would have thought that way? I mean, I watched interviews and watched clips of, I've seen so many of Reverend King sit down with people calling him Martin Luther Coon to his face. And he's still showing them respect, still showing them grace, because he goes, it's bigger than me. This is bigger than me. This is about all of us. This is about this community. This is about our city. This is about us having rights. And I mean, I don't think I'm there even, at that point, but it gives me hope to continue. You know, I'll say following Bernice King. You know, Bernice hasn't always been an ally, you know, but following Bernice and the stuff that she posts about her father, those type of people keep me going. Mm-hmm. You know, when everything seems to fall out. So it's not, I'm not trying to upset anybody. My hope is always that people will hear what I'm saying and not see it as divisive, but to see it as healing, and to see it as bringing people together and real inclusion. I mean, it's inclusion now, you know, it's not just about afterlife. It's about now. It's real inclusion now. But it's tough, man. It's tough. It's tough.
Well, Jay, I want to thank you for giving us your time today.
Of course.
Talk about some of these issues, complex issues, and kind of sharing your personal stories. And you know, I
should
know,
we end on a happier note?
I was going to say, you know, our focus has been on faith, politics, and pastoral leadership. And I think we covered all of it. You know, we did it all. I mean, it's all there. And I think as we, and thank you for going beyond our time limit. Also, it was like, because, you know, I'm just clued into you, so I'm just there, just being, you know, kind of fed by all of this that's been going on that we've been talking about today. But if we do wrap up, I want to give you an opportunity to get a final word for us, and also let people know how they can support your ministry, and how we can pray for you in your ministry, and how we can just tell us what you want us to know as you wrap it up, and a final benediction for us.
See, I didn't grow up mainline, so was it go in peace or something? Is that the benediction? I have a lot less holidays than you guys. Okay, so I'll give you this. Just, you know, let's learn to disagree well. Let's learn to scapegoat less. Learn to see your enemies as victims of misinformation. You know, we often feel like victims, and that's why we lash out, and we feel like these people are victimizing us, but often we don't realize the words that they're using against us is their own victimization and their own fear. And I think we can outlove them. I think we can, because we know where we've been there. You know, they always talk about like not repeating become the parent that your kid, you know, that you didn't have, become the person you didn't have. So I'm just saying, become the follower of Jesus that you never had in the room. And that might be yelling at somebody every now and then and get them some hard truth, but it also might be loving on somebody who just is so intertwined in legalism and so afraid. I mean, this woman who rebuked me and told me I had the devil in me, she was probably in her late 70s. She just needed a hug and to tell her she's going to be okay. So I love radically, show grace with anarchy, realize grace is also for your enemies, and that restoration is possible, and that we are going to have to make some sacrifices. I'm making a lot of sacrifices right now to continue to do my work. So I'm not trying to ask anything that I wouldn't ask anybody else, but, you know, make the sacrifices for love, for the agape love, for the love that Paul talks about in Corinthians 13, that never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. You know, people talk about wokeness and things like that, but Paul says you could give everything you have to the poor. You could do all this stuff, but without love, you're just a clanging cymbal. You're just noise. So what I ask is that if you're going to be progressive, if you're going to be woke, you're going to do this, make sure love is the main tool in that toolbox.
I love it.
You know, so that's what I would say there. As far as prayer for me, you know, I mean, just life is tough. I just pray for just a little peace, a little bit favor. I just, you know, insurance is horrible and all these things. There's a lot of stuff going on in life that makes it tough. But I want to be the best dad I can be. And I want to be able to help people the best I can. I just want to make a living doing what I love. And I'm not like anybody, I guess, but that would be great. But just for some peace of mind, you know, everything is so crazy right now in this country, and with the president throwing all this horrible stuff at us constantly, it just doesn't feel. I'm watching neighborhoods that I lived in, you know, fighting ICE and going through all this stuff, and you know, and it's just we gotta pray for each other. We gotta stand up. We gotta get organized. Try to get organized. To leaders out there, when people say they want to get organized, reach out to them. And one of the greatest things that happened to me was when White, who did Soul Force.
Mel White.
Mel White.
I met Mel White years ago, and I said, Mel, I want to help you out. And he goes, they'll think you're gay. And I'm like, I don't care. I want to help you. A week later, I got a call from the head, the person who had taken over for him, saying, hey, Jay, we want to put together a whole thing and go on these things with you and do it. And we did it. And we met with like these mega preachers and these mega pastors. I sat down with Joel Osteen one-on-one and had a conversation about becoming affirming, you know. So I said, I want to be a part of what you're doing. Let's get organized. And we did. Take those moments seriously. Mm-hmm. Problem is, we go, oh yeah, being organized would be nice. And we never talk to that person again, or we never talk about it again, and we don't go anywhere with it. You know, or you talk to a leader and go, we need to get organized. And the leader's so burnt out. He's like, well, who's going to do it? I can't do it. That person who just said, let's get organized, say, okay, come aboard. Yeah. You're going to help me do this. Yeah. And if you can't do it, we're going to find somebody else who can do it. And we're going to find out what your call is and what your purpose is on this. So those type of things we need to do and pray for, that people do that more. It would be great. You can help Revolution by going to revolutionchurch.com. And you know that you can donate there. We have a Venmo and a PayPal. We can donate those ways, and that really, really helps. But you can also help the church just by going to our Instagram and our Facebook, and subscribing to our YouTube channel. That was really helpful. Liking the talks and sharing those with your friends and neighbors. If something really hits you, let people know. Even a kind comment goes such a long way.
Indeed, it does.
Just saying, oh, this touched me. Oh, this is what I need to hear. I get those. You know what I usually do? I screenshot them and I send them to people who I know care about me and know the struggles I'm having, because we're able to really celebrate that together. You know, and so that's the way you can help Revolution. And man, otherwise, we keep moving forward. It's not, God, I keep saying I'm tired, but I really am. And I think that's what we need to say, though, is as pastors and leaders and stuff, is bringing people together is also like, this is really tough work. This is another reason we need to be better about community and about each other, and realizing, I'm going to stand on a soapbox for a second, and then I promise we'll end. Community is not your church building. And I learned this the hard way, not the hard way. I learned this the best way when I was in Atlanta. In Atlanta, most of the people that I felt were part of Revolution were outside of the building and never attended church, because I hung out in Little Five Points. It was a smaller community, but I knew all the people in all the shops and all these things. My best friend was a piercing Satanist who would come home to my mom's house during Thanksgiving. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he would come home to my mom's house and we'd all have Thanksgiving together. Sometimes he'd bring a girlfriend with him. We all would hang out. We go play pool. Mom didn't play pool. Mom stayed at home. But then we go play pool. We come back to mom's house and do all this stuff. And what I realized is just being in a community, I used to call it like the Mayberry concept, of where you have like the barber and the town drunk and the church. You know what I mean? That is the community. And we become part of that community, because at the end of my work in Atlanta, I would have people call me from the shop going like, there's a street preacher out here screaming at us. Could you come down and talk to him? Or a bartender say, hey, Jay, can you come here for a second? I need to talk to you in the back room. Thinking like, oh, gosh, what have I done? Or what have one of my people done? He goes, my mom's dying. Will you pray for me? I don't know if I believe in God or not, but I'm desperate. So that's what we can do and what we continue to try to do. So thank you for having me on. I'm sorry I was all over the place today.
Oh, no, you're great. Thank you for taking the time with us, Jay. And
of course.
Just hear and receive that we love you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us. And thank you for watching with us today. Again, you can see more of this at sunshinecathedral.org. You can see this whole conversation at sunshinecathedral.org on the Bishop page and also on the YouTube page as well. Again, thank you for being with us, Jay. Love you. Thank you for taking the time.
Love you guys.
Bless.